Hello and welcome. Today we will cover how to dual boot Windows and Arch on the same device. I expect that you currently have a computer with a drive where you have installed Windows, and we will cover how to add Arch Linux to it. I have made already a tutorial, in-depth tutorial for beginners, 2 hours and 20 minutes long. Usually tutorials like this are 40 minutes at most, so this is really in-depth, going through everything, explaining everything. And in that tutorial I cover this outcome where you have only one drive and you wipe everything and install Arch Linux only. You have another option is when you have the main drive where it's, for example, SSD and you have Windows in it, and a secondary drive, for example, some hard disk, and you install Arch Linux on it. And for this middle option, I didn't cover it because I didn't have confidence that I will properly explain it, that I will properly set it up so that you don't have problems afterwards on you, or you don't mess up your computer. And that's why I replaced it with installing a virtual machine. But in this video, this is an DLC, it's a free DLC extension of the main video, where we will cover how to add Arch Linux to your to the same drive where you have Windows installed. Keep in mind, if you are a beginner and you are new to all of this, follow how you would go through this current video. You would have to go to this video where I cover everything in depth, or to follow the main official Arch Linux guide. My video is based upon the main Arch Linux guide, everything. Even the Arch Linux guide has even more information than what I have covered. But in order to have dual boot, I will just change a few things. So if you want to see how to set up your USB or from where to download, you have to go here, how to acquire an installation, how to prepare the installation medium, how to boot the live medium. I go into details, which keys to hit, to set keyboard layout and font, to verify you're in UEFI mode. You have to go into cut this file and see here output 64 or 32. If it's missing, you're not in UEFI and you have to change it. How to connect to the internet, because if you're on Wi-Fi, you have to connect, you'll need internet access, how to update the system clock. You can even watch this part, but in this video I'll cover it. I'll cover how to find which disk to work with. And after this, you can skip this intro to fdisk and partitioning. This is the difference. In this video, I'll cover partitioning. What is the difference with partitioning? I'll even use an even simpler application than fdisk. Easier application to work with for new users. This video is an improved version. So partitioning, in this video, I'll show the differences for when you have currently Windows installed. And I'll also cover formatting the partitions, I'll cover mounting the file systems, I'll cover installing essential packages, I'll cover fstab. Time zone and localization, I'll not cover it. Localization, but network configuration, I'll go over it in this video. And root password and users, I'll also go over in this video. The absolute necessities, in this video, I'll go over them. Microcode, I'll also go over it in this video. And in bootloader, we have a difference from the main video. there is a difference in what we do, and I'll go over it in this video. But as you can see, if you're new to all of this and you need help with all of the steps, you should stick with this video, and just when you reach partitioning and fdisk, to switch back to this video, to the current video for dual boot, where I'll cover better actually how to partition so that we can save our Windows installation. And in bootloader, in this step, we'll also show what the difference is. And here we go into rebooting, set and logging in. This will not be covered in this video, in the video for dual boot. In the main guide, after installing dual boot, you can log into your Arch Linux installation. Just continue with this video from here on out, where we reboot and log in and set up networks. Because you have to set up your Wi-Fi access if you are relying on Wi-Fi with this command. You set it up once and it's ready. On restart, it's there. And I go over basic commands, etc., and even what's next for desktop environments, window managers, even installing applications, and what the workflow is while using it, and where to look for everything. So if you are new to all of this, use my in-depth walkthrough guide as the main video. And just when you reach partitioning, when you also reach bootloader, for these small parts, you will look at my video that you're currently watching, and we'll just go over the differences. Some parts will repeat, like I'm going through the main essential parts, and those are, for example, setting up a user and a password, administrative password. They are the same as in here. Some parts will repeat, but some parts that are not necessary, I'm skipping. Even setting up networking, I'm also skipping. And if you're experienced, if you know what you're doing, you can survive only with the current video right now that you're watching. If you're experienced, you will not need to go through this video. This is only for people that are new to all of this. And some preparations, you can check system information to check if everything is correct. So for system information, let's zoom in. So what you have to check for? You have to check for BIOS mode. It should be in UEFI, because the installation process for non-UEFI BIOS mode will be different. It will be different, and I'm covering UEFI currently. Next, you would want to see your motherboard, so base board product. This is if you're on a desktop. If you're on a laptop, just use the laptop model and name, because here on motherboard you will not have something like this where you can use. This will be used to search up in internet how to boot into the USB device, how to go into BIOS if you have to, how to change some settings. And secure boot state, it should be off. For me, it's on. But if you want to install dual boot, this has to be off. And you should change it in BIOS. Just look up the motherboard name or the laptop model and see how to set secure boot state off. Or look at the manual of the motherboard or your laptop. They should have a manual. And that's basically it. And in the end, you will have dual boot installation of Windows N of Arch Linux, and it will be stable. So what to expect from all of this as a result? Let's open, for example, this image. You would have something like this. It's what we call dual booting. You have the options of picking which operating system to boot into. So the first option will be Arch Linux, and when you select it, you will boot into the Arch system. And you would have Windows Boot Manager. For us, it will be called whatever we like, for example, Windows 11. We will set it up manually. And when you enter it, you will boot into Windows. That's dual boot. You pick your operating system. And even if for some mistake, some chance, Windows boot ends up missing, for some reason your only option is Linux, we have made it in such a way. I tried my best to make it such a way, the installation, to be so safe that you'll have the option when the same way you boot it into your USB device, you will be able, instead of booting into the USB device, you will find Windows Boot Manager in the boot menu or in your BIOS setting up the boot priority, like the boot priority options. You will see your Windows Boot Manager separated. So everything is separated. We are not messing with the Windows partitions. We are leaving them alone. We are not touching them at all. So even if we mess up something, we are messing up outside of our Windows installation. So everything is, it's a lot safer way of installing dual boot. And here you will find something like UEFI, grub lower dash UEFI. And when you enter through this way, if you pick a boot device to be your grub UEFI boot partition, it will go back to here. It will boot into this where, and if this is your default boot device, every time on startup, you will be able to pick, do you want Ubuntu or do you want Windows boot? And if you change your boot priority, it could be automatically straight into Windows. So I've tried my best to make this installation as safe as possible, where we don't mess up anything. And it's different than the other tutorials. Trust me, the other tutorials are different. They use the Windows boot partition, they change it, but it's only 100 megabytes. It has to, you need to have more space inside it. Like, I found a way where I have confidence in teaching it, but still, don't follow blindly. Have a vague idea of what's going on. Like, be triple check everything you're doing. If you want, you can just go over the videos without doing anything, or you could test on a test machine where you're not working with important files and partitions. For example, I have a laptop that I don't have anything important on it, and I test all kinds of experiments on it. You could try something like that. Just be careful. I've tried my best to make this tutorial as safe as possible, but still be careful, know what you're doing. We are deleting, formatting partitions, creating new partitions. It's a bit more advanced than regular installation, so just be careful and make backups. Have backups of your system, of your files, to be sure. Because when you make a mistake and there's no backup, the situation becomes very desperate, and I don't want you guys to be in the comments with a dire situation where I cannot even help you guys. That's the last thing I want to happen. I want everyone to be glad and to have reached their goal and to be happy. So if something happens and you have a hard time, down in the comments, write to me, I'll try my best. First, we need to see with how much free space are we working with. we need to start this application, disk management. We open it by pressing the Windows key and R key. Then you would have to type it inside of the box where it says open. So let's type disk mgmt.msc. Hit OK. And it will open a new window. Let me zoom in the window. In this window, we will see the current state of our drive. Currently, my drive is full. I don't have any unallocated space. I may have free space in C, but it's not unallocated. I cannot use it for installing Arch Linux. So here I can see from 930 gigabytes, I have free space about more than 600 gigabytes. So I can easily shrink the volume to get some unallocated space. How do I know I don't have any unallocated space? I just see here the coloring. Here the coloring is blue. So it's some kind of a partition that is formatted and currently used. So we need to create some free space where we will install Arch Linux alongside our Windows operating system. To make some free space, you have to decide from which partition to take space from it, to take its free space. Currently, I have the boot partition of Windows, which is 100 megabytes. I cannot use it. I have my C drive that has more than 600 gigabytes of free space. I can use it. And I have some recovery partition that Windows automatically makes that is 600 megabytes. I cannot use it. So my only option is C. I don't have that much of a choice. But if you had disk drive D, for example, you could use it as well. Now, how to create some free space for our Arch Linux installation. You have to right click on the partition you have picked. For me it's C. And then go down to shrink volume. And then it should load for a bit. We have to wait it to analyze some things. Can I actually... Okay. Now we currently see how much space we're working with. This is the space I can use. So I can tell the machine to create me 679 gigabytes of unallocated space, but that's too much. Sometimes I did this on another machine where I had 40 gigabytes of free space. I think 45 gigabytes of free space. And here it told me I could work with only with 5 gigabytes. So maybe there is a minimum of, there's a limit of not letting you take up all of the free space. But I'm not sure about that. But here I can easily work with this. And I recommend to have at least 30 gigabytes for Arch Linux. I think you can go even lower. I think in VirtualBox, when you create a virtual machine, it recommends the minimum of 8 gigabytes, something like that. But in recent years, we have plenty of free space. Some games are even more than 200 gigabytes, so we can easily give it here more than 30 gigabytes. So let's, for example, pick 100 gigabytes. So here we're working with megabytes, so we have to times it 1000. So 100 gigabytes and add 3 zeros after it. 1, 2, 3. And now I will have unallocated space of 100 gigabytes. And click shrink when you're ready. and it is done. It's not exactly 100 gigabytes because we typed it as megabytes, but still it's pretty close. This is the space we will be working with. In the next steps, the free space I'm working with is this. This is the free space. And yeah, just restart the computer and boot into the USB device so that we can start installing Arch Linux. Now let's partition the disk. Which is the disk we're working with? How can we figure it out? Let's use lsblk. Here, the only thing we can orient ourselves with is the size of the disks and partitions, and the name on the left and the type on the right. With the name, if it's SDA, SDB, it's a hard disk or a USB, something like that, usually. If it's NVMe 0N1, I think N2, it's an SSD. And on the right, where it says type, we can see which is a disk, this is a disk, and which is a partition, this is a partition. Now, so this is what we're working with. For me, most of the time, this is enough. This is 1 terabytes of disk, and it's a hard disk. I know this is my secondary disk. It's not my main one where I have my free space that I'm working with and that I have Windows installed. This is my USB device, and this is my SSD. I know this is what I'm working with, and here are my Windows partitions. If you're still not sure, you can type fdisk-l, then the appropriate name of the disk, which should start first with dev and then the name of the disk. So I want to see more details about NVMe 0 and 1. And here I see it's Kingston, etc. So it's my SSD. And even for the partitions, I see now more information that they're of type the boot partition, Microsoft. This is where my Windows currently is. So for this step, we're figuring out with which device we're working with. I found out that the device I'm working with is the NVMe 0N1. This is it. So every time I tell you dev NVMe 0N1, for you, it should be your particular disk. So it could be SDA. Before we partition anything, we can make a backup of the partition table so that if we make a mistake, we can easily can undo everything. So currently, if I look at my disk that I'm working with, fdisk-l dev NVMe 0N1, this is the current state of it, without me changing anything. So to make a backup, you will write sfdisk space -d, then dev, and what is the disk you're working with. For you, it may be SDA. For me, it's the SSD NVMe 0N1. And then a right arrow and the name of the file. How should it be? You can name it whatever you want. I'll name it NVMe 0N1.dump. NVMe 0N1 to know that which disk it is. I can even add here initial state, but I'll just leave it at that. And now if I go into cfdisk, into the partition itself, I'll go over cfdisk and everything in a bit, but let me just demonstrate me making a mistake. Like, don't follow me along here, but for example, I make a partition and oops, it takes up all of the free space, and I don't want that. But I've accidentally even hit right and accidentally even typed yes and hit enter. And now all know what I can do. Like, we can delete it here, but let's say it's an undoable change. So hit quit. And now, if we go with fdisk-l def nvme 0 and 1, we see that our change is there. But let's say it was a mistake and we cannot easily undo it by deleting a partition or something else. It's too big of a mess up. So when we have made too big of a mess up, we can undo it with our backup by typing sfdisk, then the name of the disk we're working with, NVMe 0 and 1. Be careful with the naming here, because you will change the partition table of the disk you're typing here. So be very careful. Here all of the disks are quite similar to each other. So another one could be with a 2 after it. So triple check everything. And this is how we backup, we undo all of the changes. And we're not actually making an undo, we're just bringing it to the state it was. If it was another disk, it will bring that disk to the state the disk we have backed up was. So be very careful which disk you're targeting. And now the file we created, nvme .dump. And if we hit enter, now it was brought back to the way it was. So if we type fdisk-l def nvme 0 and 1, it has been brought back to the way it was. So even with cfdisk def nvme 0 and 1, here I have the free space, everything is how it was. This is a very useful functionality we can use, especially when we're new to all of this. For the actual partitioning, we will use cfdisk. It's a really user-friendly application, cfdisk. If we compare it to fdisk, for example. So cfdisk and the name of the disk we're working with. If you forgot, we can just type lsblk. And here I know it's, for me, it's NVMe 0 and 1. So cfdisk def NVMe 0 and 1. This is for me. And we hit enter. So there is a lot of text here. It could be overwhelming for you, but don't worry. And once you figure out how to go around through the application, it's not that hard. So we can move around with the arrow keys. Up and down, we move this upper section. We move through the partitions, and we can even see we have free space. And depending on what we are currently on, if we are on partition or on free space, the options below change, and even the additional text changes. To move around in the lower menu, and in this menu to move around, you have to use the right and left arrows. These are the main controls. This is what we will be using to move around. Next, find your free space. I know that I have around 74 gigabytes of free space. And this is it. This is the space I'm working with. Find it and highlight it. Now we're going to create the partitions. First, we need a boot partition. Here we can see that we already have one for our Windows machine. But for dual boot, we will create another boot partition for Arch Linux. You will see what I mean afterwards. Some people use the Windows boot partition and it works, but the problem is that I don't want to mess around with the Windows boot partition. It's much cleaner the way I'm doing it, much more secure. If we mess something up, throughout the whole process, we will not be touching any of these partitions. The only partition we are touching was the one where we shrunk to get some free space. That's it. And also, another thing is the Windows boot partition is of size 100 megabytes. This is also a problem. So we need another boot partition for our Arch installation. So you highlight it, and on the lower menu, we go to New and hit Enter. And what should be the partition size? Here it automatically puts 74 gigabytes, all the size I can use. But for the boot partition, I'll just put 1 gigabyte. Now, some people put here 300 megabytes, so it will be something like 300 megabytes. And let me demonstrate it. I'm demonstrating now. Don't press enter, but let's press enter. And here we have a partition of 300 megabytes. So if we made the mistake how to delete it, just highlight it and with the lower menu, go to the delete option and hit enter. And now once again, let me go back to where we were with new and let's set up 1 gigabyte. So some people put here 300 megabytes or 500 megabytes and say that it's plenty. But at most, you will need 1 gigabyte, no more than that. 1 gigabyte is even a lot of people would say that it's too much. But I think 1 gigabyte is reasonable. And if you have the space, why not use it? This is just a few extra megabytes. So if we go to 500 megabytes, are we saving that much? And we will dual boot. And it's good to have the space here, because if we at a later point need some more free space, you would have to do the installation all over again. We cannot get more space here. I'll put 1 gigabyte. Next, we highlight the free space again and we'll create another partition. So highlight new on the menu below and click new. Next, how much to give it here? We're working right now with a Linux swap partition. You can create a Linux swap file, but it's for new users, it will be harder to create a Linux swap file. So Linux swap partition is a bit easier. Also, some people say with a Linux swap partition, it's easier to set up some functionalities like, I think, hibernation. You can, at this point, research a bit more the difference between Linux swap and a Linux swap file and Linux swap partition. Whichever one of the two you want. But for this tutorial, I'll stick with Linux swap partition. The difference is not that big. And to use Linux swap partition is just a bit easier, and it will not be that much of space taken. Like once you set it, we forget it. Like we won't be touching it again. The plus side of Linux swap file is that it's dynamically, you can change it easily, but if it's a partition, you cannot change it that easily. But once we set it up right, there's no need to worry about the size of the partition. And here's an example table of how much swap space to have. Some people don't even follow the table. and just put 2 gigabytes, 4 gigabytes, or 16 gigabytes. But I usually just follow the table because I don't know how much to write. And here what it says is that if you have less or equal to 2 gigabytes of RAM, you have to put in for the Linux swap partition or Linux swap file 2 times that. So if you have, for example, 1 gigabyte of RAM, you would put 2 gigabytes of Linux swap space. I have 64 gigabytes of RAM, so I'll just put 4 gigabytes of swap space. Okay. Now, I just put 4 gigabytes of space. Hit enter. Next is the root partition. Now we hit new. Then you would use all of the space if you don't want another partition. By another partition, I mean a home partition. So, for example, you would want to separate your system files with your personal files. So what does this help with? It helps when you want to reinstall your computer and you want to keep all of your files and don't want to worry about backing them up, etc. It's a bit easier to set up when reinstalling. So I will use all of the space, but here you can just limit the root partition to have at a minimum 20 or 30 or 25 gigabytes. And after that, you would press enter. For example, 25 gigabytes, press enter, then go to the free space, hit new, and just fill up all of the space for a home partition. But I don't need a home partition, and if you want to see how to set up everything with a home partition, just look at my previous video. Here the focus is on dual booting, not on partitioning and mounting. So I'll just delete it. And I'll delete the root partition and just fill up all of the space. Now, let's change the types. Let's highlight the partition with 1 gigabyte size, the boot partition, the first one we created. And just go to type, hit enter, and go to the first option, FE system, and hit enter. And next for the Linux swap partition, if you have Linux swap partition, we go to type and go to Linux swap. And that's it. For Linux root and home, it's the Linux file system. We don't need to change it. Now, if you should have swap or not, you should have swap, no matter how much RAM you have. Don't listen to people telling you that, oh, new system have a lot of RAM, etc. This is old information. You should have Linux swap, either partition or swap file. Because some people have, if you don't have swap partition or file, everything can run. You will be able to boot into your computer and use it. But at some point, a problem will show up. So a user has shared how he used Chrome or his browser and created a lot of new tabs, and there a problem came up just because he didn't have swap. You need to have it. In Linux, you need to have it. I think even Windows has it and automates in a way, but not sure. Don't quote me on that. So we haven't saved anything. If we quit, nothing is saved. So be very careful, triple check everything, if everything is correct, if you haven't made any mistakes, like be sure. I'm sure that the setup I've made is correct. I haven't touched the Windows partitions. everything on my site is correct. I have triple checked. You have to go to write if you're ready to save all of this. Are you sure you want to write the partition table to the disk? And type yes or no. We are sure we want to write everything to save how it is currently. Click yes, or just press enter. So the partition table has been altered, and now we quit. And now if we press lsblk, we see how we have the extra partitions, 1 GB, 4 GB, and 70 GB. The changes were saved. Now the partitions are ready. We need to format them. So let's type fdisk-l, the disk we are working with. For me it's NVMe 0 and 1. Now let's format them. We need to start with the boot partition. Now be very careful here. My first partition is the Windows boot partition. We are not touching that. Do not touch it. Because if you format it, you're breaking your computer. It will not be able to boot again. With this step, be especially careful. For me, I know the empty partition I created is this one, the partition 4. So let's start with it. We have to format it. So mkfs.fat-F32 dev NVMe 0 and 1 partition 4. Okay, yes, I'm sure this is the one. Hit enter. And now let's format the other ones. So mkfs ext4 dev NVMe 0 and 1 partition 6. This is the root partition. Contains ext file system. Okay, proceed anyway. Yes, we're proceeding. What this means? It means that we are cleaning up the on the same place of my system there was another formatted partition. What this does is cleans it up, so it will be completely empty. If you are not sure here and you're blindly following along, do not continue. Only continue if you're sure. Now it's working on it. It's formatting. It formatted it. Next, if you're working with actually free space, I think you shouldn't have this question. I had some other files there, that's why it's telling me that. Now, if we hit the up key, and if you had a home partition, for example, on the 5th partition, you would use this command, but I don't have a home partition. I only have the swap left. So if we bring it up with the up arrow key, we can bring up fdisk. Right now, I'm not sure why it's not bringing it up, but that's not a problem. I can just type it fdisk-l dev NVMe 0 and 1. Or if you have forgotten which is your disk, you can just type lsblk. And here it is, NVMe 0 and 1. That's my case. So now we have to deal with the swap. So mkswap dev NVMe 0 and 1 p5. This is my swap partition. Do this if you have a swap partition. If you have a swap file, if you're working with a swap file, then it's a bit harder to set up. I'm not covering this in this tutorial. Okay, we set up the swap partition and now let's mount them. For mounting, let's start with the root partition. So type mount dev and then which is the root partition. For me it's nvme0n1 p6. For me that's the root partition. We're mounting it to the mount folder, mnt. If we ls into it, it's empty. Now we need to mount our boot partition. This is our boot partition, not the Windows boot partition. We're mounting the boot partition we created. So type mount dev, then the boot partition, nvme0n1 p4. This is for me, into mount boot. But this boot folder does not exist. It has to be created. So with the left arrow, we reach mount, press space, and just type 2 dashes mkdir. If you had a home partition, just here type home, and here which is the home partition, for example, the 5th one. But we don't have a home partition. We have swap partition. For the swap, we type swap on, then dev nvme0n1. My swap partition is partition 5. Press enter. And now if we type lsblk, we can check everything. So the root partition is mounted on the mount directory. Our boot partition of the Linux system that we created is in boot, and the swap partition is swap. And now we have to install the essential packages. This is with pack strap dash capital K in mount base Linux firmware. So we are installing the base package, Linux kernel, and Linux firmware. And we press enter. And now we have to wait it to go through all of the process. I'll just pause and unpause when it's ready. Okay, it's ready. Next, we want to create our fstab. So gen fstab dash capital U mount, 2 right arrows, mount etc fstab with a slash fstab. Okay, and let's see inside it with nano mount etc fstab. Okay, we have our root partition. We have our root partition. We have our boot partition, and we have our swap. Everything is fine. So Control X to exit. Next we chroot into our system. So arch dash chroot mount. And with Control L to clear the screen. And here we are in the system. Next, all of the other details and steps like setting up time zone, localization, network configuration. Okay, network configuration we'll go through. But the other smaller steps that are configurations, I'm not covering in this video. Go check out my in-depth video on all the other small details. Here I'm just showing what's the difference from the regular installation process so that you can have dual boot. Let's set up the network. First, we need to install some packages with pacman-s, nano, sudo, and network manager. Yes. And next we will edit the host name. after all of this downloads and installs. Okay, it's ready. Control L to clear the screen. And with nano, edit the etc host name. And let's change it to, for example, YouTube for me. You can edit it however you like. Control X, Y, enter. The host name is, for example, this part here, Arch ISO. This is some kind of a default, but we changed it in our system to be something else. When we reboot and boot into the system, you'll see it in the login screen. And so enable the network manager, system ctl enable network manager. And what this does is when you reboot, if you have connected an Ethernet cable, you will have internet. If you are on Wi-Fi, in my main tutorial I cover it, but you have to use a command to connect once to the Wi-Fi and afterwards you'll have internet. Now let's set up a root password. And let's create a user, a secondary user account, user at -m and the name. I'm going faster here because this is the main part of this video is the difference for dual boot. Here it's the same thing we have done in the previous video. So let's create a password for the user. And let's add them into groups, user mod -a capital G, into the wheel for sure, without spaces, into audio, video, optical, storage, and the name of the user. Some people here add the user into other groups, but all of the people add him into wheel. All of the people add him into wheel, storage, and some people write power, but I think after some time power, no reason to add it. And these, some people don't add them. You can research all of the groups, but this is not the point of the video. Okay, now let's edit the sudo command. Now type editor equals nano and then vsudo, and we go to the bottom of the page and find this the first time you see the wheel part, and just delete this comment and the space here, so you will have only this. This means uncomment to allow members of group wheel. We added our user in group wheel to execute any command. And Control X, Y, enter. So we have our user, and finally we have to set up the bootloader. But before that, we also need pacman-s. Here depends on what CPU you have. If you have AMD, you have to type AMD U code. If you have Intel, it should be Intel U code. I have Intel CPU on the machine I'm currently installing. What this does, it installs security and performance patches to your CPU. So hit enter. Yes. And after this part, we are ready to go into the difference of dual booting. After here, it's time for to show the difference. The main difference was in partitioning and now in installing grub. So we have to type pacman-s grub and fi boot mgr. Enter. Next, we have to type grub dash, let me clear the screen, Control L. Grub dash install 2 dashes target equals x86 lower dash 64 dash fe 2 dashes fe directory equals. Now the directory of our boot partition. Our boot partition is in boot. Then 2 dashes boot loader dash id equals grub lower dash UEFI. Enter. Okay, no errors reported. This is important. Next, we need to make our config. So grub.mkconfig -o boot grub.cfg. Enter. Now look at what everything it generated. It found Linux image, this image, fallback image. It found Intel U code. For you, it may be AMD U code. Perfect. And here it says OS prober will not be executed to detect other bootable partitions. Okay, this is what we need. We will manually add an entry for our Windows partition, boot partition. Adding boot menu entry for UEFI. Okay, perfect. Now, here, up to now, for grub, it was the same as the regular installation, but here is the difference. Let's go into lsblk, and this is for me, this is the drive we are working with, and this is the partition, boot partition of Windows. Let's mount it. So type mount 2 dashes mkdir def nvme 0 and 1 p1. This is for me the boot partition of the Windows of Windows. Yeah, the boot partition of the Windows into EFI. It will create a new folder. So if we ls into EFI, we see the Windows boot partition. We mounted it. Don't worry, we will not touch anything inside. We will not mess with it. We just need to set up some things. So you should have, if we type ls EFI, then capital EFI, then Microsoft, we tap it auto completes, then boot tap, then boot mgfw tap, it auto completes. And if we press enter, it shows it. Here it is. We have this file and we have this location. This is what we will use. Next, we have to edit the grub configuration. So if we go with up arrow, this is it. It's in boot grub.cfg. Let's edit it. So type nano boot grub.cfg. And here we are in the grub configuration file. We go downwards. Down. We will go to the end of the file, but I just want to show you some things. And here it is, the first menu entry. When you boot into the Arch boot partition, you will have this menu entry, Arch Linux. And when you press enter, you boot into Arch Linux. We will create something like this, but for Windows, manually. Then we go downwards, submenu entry, and we are Yeah, now we're at the end. Let's go up, 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 up. And when we saw this submenu entry, below it, we will add another entry. So we have to go down, and here it is. This is the end of it, above this comment. And let's type it here. Let's type it here, menu entry, and how we want to call it. I'll call it Windows 11. Then left and right brackets, go inside and press enter. And then hit tab and type insmod space part lower underscore gpt. Then enter, tab. Let me go down. insmod space fat. Enter, tab. insmod chain. Enter, tab. Search space 2 dashes no dash floppy space 2 dashes fs dash uuid space 2 dashes set equals root space, and just type this $sign fs uuid. We will change this part. This we will change it afterwards. Hit enter, tab, chain loader space FE Microsoft, then boot mg fwf. This is it. Here, be sure to type it the way I typed it. We just have to set the location for this file. So Control X, Y, enter. Control L to clear the screen. Now we have to type another command to get the UUID of our Windows boot partition. So grub dash probe 2 dashes target equals fs underscore uuid, and then slash fe slash capital EFI, then Microsoft, hit tab, boot, hit tab, then boot mgfw tab, and this is it, enter. You should get it here, your UUID. I'll type it, I'll write it in my notepad or type it somewhere, so remember it by typing it. So for me it's 1014-5442. And now with up arrow, we find the command, the same command for going into grub.cfg. We are going back into the configuration file and go to where we type the menu entry for Windows. Find it, where it is. Menu entry for Windows 11. Here it is. And go to the end where we typed this FSUUID. Delete it and type the numbers we saw. These are the numbers for me. For you, they're most likely different. Control X, Y, enter. And congratulations, we set up everything. I didn't go over all of the parts. I just went over the difference between the usual installation. Because for the usual installation of Arch, I went in depth, 2-hour long in-depth tutorial. You just follow it along, and this tutorial is just showing the differences. It shows the differences. The parts that I missed from the main tutorial, you most likely should go over them. For example, setting up the internet access. You have to go over that. But this video will just go a bit too long. So let's exit from here and you mount dash capital R mount. And we're ready. Just type reboot. And before hitting enter, what will happen? You will have, it will automatically boot into the Arch grub installation. And you will have the options for picking to boot into Arch, and you would have the option to boot into Windows. For us, we typed it Windows 11 menu entry. If for some reason the menu entry for Windows ends up missing, in the same way we boot it into the USB device, you can boot into the Windows boot partition. Like as if we haven't installed anything, you can boot into your Windows boot partition the same way you boot it into your USB device. Don't worry. But when you boot into the Linux boot partition, you will enter grub, where you will have the option for entering Arch and the option for starting Windows. It's just on the same place. And that's it. We have dual boot. This is it. Congratulations.